The clouds are slowly going away, the sun is coming out, and the day has a beautiful breeze that is looking to comfort us all as we proceed forward with our artistic endeavors and our pure focus, man. My cat's over here right now, totally surrounded by the pure comfort with the window behind him, man. He is truly living the dream that we all aspire to. Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. Man, we got a good amount to talk about today. I'm officially in full on 1956 watching mode, so for the next couple episodes, I may not, I won't be talking about recent films that I have viewed because usually with the past couple episodes, I will talk about films that I had just watched. I mean, on the last episode, I had mentioned the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. I had finished it that morning, so it was very fresh in my mind. But with the upcoming weeks, I will not be talking about those films until that episode. And if any of you who are new to the channel are not familiar with what that means, what it is every couple of months I do a special top 10 video where I randomize the years from 1930 to the previous year. So right now it'd be to 2021. And then I spend a couple months watching as much as I can from those years, and then at the end doing a top 10. So I've already done 1998 and 1958, and right now I am doing 1956, and that episode will be coming out at the beginning of July. I've officially bumped it to 4 months because before it was a little tricky figuring out when exactly the amount of time stopped. But 4 months seems to be a fairly good indicator, a fairly good stopping point. So from now on, however far on I continue to do it, the episodes will arrive. One in March, July, and November. So look out for that coming soon. So for the next couple weeks, I'll just have to find some other stuff to talk about, and then we will move on from there. Updates since last time. I have officially finished Killing for Culture from Edison to ISIS, written by David Korekis and David Slater. I had mentioned this before a lot, actually quite a bit on 2 episodes, and I wanted to just discuss it one last time since having finished it and maybe some final thoughts on it. I'm by no means giving a review. What you could always do is just put the last couple, if you really want to hear me talk more in depth about it, watch, I forget which episodes they were, but in the description I always put what is talked about that episode, so you can see right in the description. But just going to give some final thoughts and overall impressions of the book. Definitely not a review. This book was truly phenomenal, man. This is what it means to just dive into a book and get totally immersed. This is a thick book, about 600 or so pages. I forgot how many exactly, with an appendix and a directory at the end. So, take that as you will, give or take some amount of pages. So at least a good 600 pages in small text too. So, I mean, this takes quite a while to get through, but it is totally worth it, man. I think the way that they have done it was that they are able to balance out a academic approach with an entertaining approach, because the authors, for the most part, I think, besides a couple of times, they don't give their opinions too often. They mostly just kind of say that the Mondo films mostly were ended up being fairly dull, or maybe there's a little comment here and there about some particular film or not. And with that instances like that are okay, because I've read books too often where the author is trying to present a historical account of something while not attempting to stray away from their subjectivity, and oftentimes it can be a little distracting, but this does it very well. The final section of the book, which is what I hadn't previously read, goes into briefly goes into some of the newer quote-unquote snuff trading, if you will, about the ISIS kind of videos that were coming out around probably 2015 or so. I'm not exactly sure about that, but they talk briefly about it because it doesn't prolong it too much. It sort of just goes more into about the videos that ISIS were putting out and their something that I hadn't even realized because I have never seen any of those videos, only the screenshots of the befores. If you have someone on their knees and about to be executed, and I just don't want to see that. But they talk about how they were dissatisfied with the reaction that they were getting early on when they were putting out the beheading videos, and so they got more. They got more. Varied with it. They, some of the other methods of murder they were doing and the production of the videos and how they were, in high definition and they were doing edits and to make it more thematic and like a film. So it's very interesting to see the evolution of cameras and editing equipment to everyone, and they are no exception. And it talks a little bit about going into the appendix some other topics that didn't really have quite a place in the book, but were still mentioned. They talk about some, some of the animal documentaries that were coming out. Not too many. They only mention a couple. I think ones that I already knew about, like the Animal movie, Earthlings, which I mentioned briefly before on the episode where I talk about the bridge. And there was one they mentioned that was interesting because I couldn't find any record of it anywhere, because sometimes with some of the films they mention, I like to look them up and see. And there was one that I don't remember the name of, and I don't want to spend time trying to find it right now, but it was one about an underground guy who was making a movie about like underground animal fights or something like that, and I think it was called Blood Fields or something like that. It was I can't find any record of it online, and they said they had received a tape of it. So I mean, I really couldn't tell you. If they said they have a tape of it, and that's something, but the fact that I can't find any reference at all online is very questionable. But it is interesting. They talk a little bit about some of the other kinds of videos that were being put out online in terms of that, they talk briefly about the Crush videos that were coming out, and some other things where it starts to trail off a little bit for me is when it starts to get into they talk briefly about some video games and stuff about that game Manhunt and some Japanese game or whatever where you kill women or that stuff. I don't really I think I'm glad it was not in the actual book, because I think that kind of strays away from the topic of less about snuff and more about violence and culture, which is fine in a different kind of book. But for an appendix, for a brief kind of 2 or 3 page mention, I'm totally fine with that, because I don't know much about video games or anything like that. So it was interesting to kind of read about that, and they talk a little bit about some of the Tomb Raider, where you could have the nude Lara Croft, and I didn't really think that needed to be in the book. That seems like a different topic altogether, but it was just interesting to read nonetheless. I'm not giving a complaint about that. I'm just saying that for in an appendix, I'll be a little less picky. But what I was saying before is that a lot of films mentioned in here, a lot of films I never heard about. There's a section as well at the end. They talk about a lot of the Manson films that were spawned because of that, and there was a lot of interesting ones that I never even heard of. There's one that I have seen that I forgot to mention, which I'm not really even going to talk about, but I wanted to mention it, was The Other Side of Madness, which recently had a Blu-ray about a couple months ago, and I don't know who put that out, but that's a very interesting experimental film that was released while the trial was still happening, and some of it was filmed at Spawn Ranch, I believe, and it has one of his songs in the film. What's interesting about The Other Side of Madness, man, is that at the time the events were still relatively mostly unknown. A lot of information, it was everybody kind of speculating, this or that, and the film does recreate the horrible Tate murders of Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Wojtek Wojtkowski, and Abigail Folger, and the other gentleman, Stephen Parent. And it's important I always think to say the victims' names and not the, they're the ones who are the ones who should be mentioned in a case like this, but more so than giving scumbags any more attention than they needed by giving them their name. But that's a film that, like I said, was around that time, and it recreates it in a mostly true way from what we, now that we know what happened there. It is pretty fascinating that it's mostly correct about the events that preceded the night, and it's definitely Obviously trying to be the first. I think it may have been the first Manson film. Please do not quote me on that because that might be untrue. But it's a very interesting way of how they do it. Besides just a typical recreation. I haven't seen a whole lot of the Manson films about Manson, like that the famous kind of Helter Skelter TV movie. I think that was '73. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going off topic. The Other Side of Madness, I would actually recommend, is a very interesting film. It's funny, people. It's a weird kind of parallel to draw between bad taste and historical account. I think that's a whole other conversation, man, that I don't really want to get into right now. Especially that I'd rather hear somebody else's opinion on to discuss and further educate myself in terms of how long does a film based on a true story have to be before it comes off as cashing in or a bad taste or trying to actually tell a story. I don't know, and I think that we definitely look at older films about tragedies that are made closer in a different light compared to now. If a tragedy happens and somebody makes a film about it, when there's outrage or so to speak. It's an interesting discussion that I was having with someone briefly a little while ago. We had disagreed on the what's the name of the film? Oh gosh, I always forget the name of the film. It's the extremely wicked, shockingly, oh, Jesus Christ. Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, Vile, I think is the name of it. The Zac Efron, Ted Bundy movie. We basically had a friendly disagreement. He said the film was in bad taste. I didn't think so, but and he saw that the Lords of Chaos film about the heavy metal band Mayhem and the whole story there. I didn't see that film, but he was saying that he felt that was kind of in bad taste as well. That's a whole other conversation. I'm just saying it's interesting to look at these films now in terms of when they were released to a tragedy. But I went totally off topic there. But this book is terrific, man. I think David Korekas and David Slater have made an academic but also entertaining look at the history of the not only the rumor of a snuff film being a real kind of thing or not, but they talk a lot about a lot of the films that were coming out, a lot of the media's kind of response to it in terms of films representation of snuff films like Hardcore, Emmanuel in America, 8mm, up to films now. They talk about some recent ones, Death Tube and other of the like, and kind of there's a couple times when they mention some other people who said they have seen them, but then either they find out that it's just a shockumentary film or it's a bogus kind of end. So it's interesting, man, especially now with the internet and everyone sharing undeniably real videos of murder and grotesque violence and stuff. It's interesting. That whole era is over, and the idea now of buying a film it's a thing where they mentioned as well where which I find interesting, which to me is what steers me the most into my conclusion on snuff films, is that the way that I see it, man, I think that it's been so long since this whole idea has kind of been put into the pop culture realm that if nothing has shown up by now, it seems way too unlikely to be real, because it's sort of like, I mean, undeniably people, have paid to be, assassins and all that, have paid each other, but the widespread sale of it, of a tape or something like that, it's if nothing has come up by now, it seems extremely unlikely. And they talk about how, how underground can you really go in terms of one or two people having it, and then nothing ever surfaces of it. If it's just at this point, like, there's too many factors into it. They mention a lot of stuff about the dark web and stuff, and the deep web and the trading on there, and it's just, there's too many factors, man, for it to not be real, especially now at this point with what we have. But it's a very interesting read. This is just one of the strongest books I've read of recent memory, and definitely a lot of films that I wrote down here that I've never heard anyone else talk about. A lot of great photos as well. Almost every page has a poster or an image or something that accompanies it. Obviously, it goes without saying there are some real grotesque there's some real grotesque imagery in the book that if if you think will be upsetting to see instead of just reading about, then just be forewarned. There is a lot of images of death and real bodies and such that if you think will be upsetting, then may not be the book for you. There is some stuff here and there, and I might try to get at. But anyways, yeah, I apologize, man. I'm going off the rails here, but yeah, I was able to find this online, and it's just an extremely fascinating book and one of the strongest that I read. It took some time to get through, man, but it was constantly enjoyable in terms of how it was structured. And when I say enjoyable, I mean that it kept me, when I had to put the book down, I just wanted to pick it back up, and that's the best thing I can say about a book like this. So, Killing for Culture. With the weeks coming up, not talking about super recent watches, I'll probably discuss more of the books that I've been reading, including the one I'm almost finished with now that I'll let you know about. But going on to a couple of films that I wanted to briefly mention before the end of the episode. I got some time left. I wanted to mention a film that, one of the films I had watched earlier the week, which I heard was a Tarantino favorite, along with Brian Sauer being a big fan of this film, and Brian Sauer's opinion, who hosts the Pure Cinema podcast along with Just the Discs. He is a big fan of this film as well, and I trust his opinion greatly. He has rarely let me down in terms of quality recommendations. And that is Fandango from 1985. This was directed by Kevin Reynolds, starring Kevin Costner, Judd Nelson, Sam Robards, Chuck Bush, and Brian Sessick. Or, I'm sorry, him as well, but Marvin J. McIntyre. I was trying to name the main four there. And this was a really phenomenal film put out by Warner Archive recently, and a film that is a total cult film, man, because it's one that I can see why maybe it wouldn't have worked initially when it came out, because maybe you're expecting one thing, but this is a truly heartfelt drama comedy about four friends who, this is a period piece taking place in the early 70s, and two of the characters are getting they're getting drafted into the war. They're all four of them are, I believe, are just out of college, and their futures are very uncertain. I'm sorry, it's not that they're uncertain. They're just they're kind of worried about the future ahead. Two of them are getting drafted. One of them is, I believe, becoming an accountant, and I forgot what the other one was doing. But they're going on a trip through the desert to going up to the Mexican border to dig up what they call to dig up what was it? I think it was what the hell was the name of it? It was Dom. Yeah, that's what it was. It's a rock that has the word Dom scratched on it, and they're going up there to dig it up, and along the way there is tension. They get themselves into situations that start to test their friendship in the future ahead, and the worries that, Kevin Costner is one of the leading performances here, and I think his character is one of the most nuanced, because he is the most free-willing, kind of let loose character who just wants to go with the flow and enjoy the things. But what the film does so strongly is that it has it would be so easy to make that character a obnoxious kind of free spirit who doesn't really take things too seriously, but we see how layered that character is, how frightened he is, of just how he seems to be putting on this masquerade of just, let's go out and have fun and do this crazy things, but on the inside you can see this worry behind him. And I think one of the strongest sequences in the film, in my opinion, maybe besides the very ending, which has one of the most, the ending of this film I'll talk about without giving any spoilers, but there's a sequence in the film where the four of them meet up with a couple of girls, and they want to in bad taste, have a fireworks fight in a cemetery, which, hey man, it's totally wild. But Kevin Costner and Sam Robards, who I also forgot to mention, Sam Robards was supposed to be engaged, but he calls it off, and where that plot line goes through. But they're having a fight in a cemetery, and it's very, you watch it and it's in bad taste, but they're all having fun and it's very lighthearted. But then there's a point where Kevin Costner and Sam Robards, they kind of fall together and they look back, and this is beautifully shot as well. against the black sky with the stones set against it, all sticking up one by one, kind of like a play or something along those lines. You see the air. It sounds like the sounds of fireworks sounding like gunshots rattling off one after another. And that sense of joy and excitement is brought down by this dread and existential future of having to go to war. And they both give a look without any dialogue. They don't have to say anything. And it says it all, man. What I was saying before with Kevin Costner's character, that character who hides behind this masquerade of this unpredictable future of being scared, who doesn't want the party to end, doesn't want this era to end. The whole thing of him in this journey is really a nostalgia trip for him. How many people in life do you meet who want to just relive the old days and, oh, remember when we did this and remember we could recreate that? I'm personally very anti-nostalgia. I am truly somebody who wants to go forward. Yes, I mean, we all remember things and we remember the good times, but how many times do we remember that we didn't even think about at the time as a good memory, that you look back and go, you know what, a simple scenario like that, getting dinner with a friend, being in this time and place, these little moments that you don't even think about are the ones that truly stick out for me more so than any particular major event. And Dax, the character, man, he wants to relive these days and is afraid to move on with the future, which is so layered to him, and goes into the third act of the film, which I'll get in a little bit. Judd Nelson, the film as well, who, I mean, Judd Nelson is an actor who I always felt like has been so underappreciated in terms of performances because, you know, I think his work post Breakfast Club is so fascinating, the amount of work that he was doing in different roles that he was doing. Now, this was the same year as the Breakfast Club, but seeing him in this film to that is very, it feels totally not just the way the character acts, obviously, because his character in the Breakfast Club, Bender, is very memorable and is maybe the one that people remember the most of that film. But his mannerisms in the film, this kind of fragile, meek character who is trying to be realistic, but is afraid to move on as well, is so interesting. He also did a film that I'm a big fan of, The Dark Backward by Adam Rifkin, which is, I think, a very funny film as well. He plays a very good, nervous kind of character in that. And I mean, Judd Nelson is just great, man. I think he did such a good job later on of not being typecasted as as that character, and he's just great. And Sam Robards as well is great. And the progression of the film, what I like about the film is that the characters are so strongly written that you're able to look past what would otherwise be detrimental to a film. I think the third act especially, you could see the convenience of a lot of things that happen, you could say is a detriment to the script, but to me, because I was enjoying it so much, and why I don't think I could ever review a film objectively or talk about a film objectively. I've said before, I don't believe in objectivity in a film. If a film is good and it's made for $2 and it's better than the $200 million film, then I think the $2 film is better. I don't really care about aesthetics or how well you lined up a shot or how well the special effects look. If a film is good and brings an emotional value to me, then I value that much more than anything more grandiose. And that's what the film does in the third act, is that it's very convenient for sure. And I definitely was sitting there going, wait a minute, how did this seems to happen very quick. But the emotion that it brought in the last 20 minutes or so, which goes from a very funny situation of they're having to pull this task together and they're relying on favors. They're, oh man, this didn't happen, and somebody else comes in, well, I can do this. Oh, well, okay. And the way that all happens is very amusing. But I think the final 5 minutes of the film is a really interesting tonal shift, and I'm not going to spoil anything, so don't worry. But what happens at the end of the film leaves a little bit of ambiguity and kind of puts one character, it really sums up his entire journey in the film. The final shot of the film as well can be interpreted as many different things, and the final line of the film kind of sums up maybe their friendship there. Maybe not sums up, but kind of puts the whole film into perspective. The final shot of the film, it really left me with a lot on my mind of just about what was going to happen next. And I didn't really expect that from a film. Not to say I didn't expect it from a film like this, because I should have seen it coming. This film has a great balance between very silly moments and very over the top moments. There's a whole great one of the funniest sequences in the film where the car dies and they have an idea of tying it to or tying a piece of wire to a train. And I will not say how that sequence ends, but it's very great and actually gave me a good laugh. But then you have these more humane moments between the friendship of the characters that's being tested, sort of a last ride, if you will, of just the end of an era, man. And some people are able to move on with their lives, and some people just don't want to, and are trapped in this perpetual state of youth. And they talk about how young they talk about, they're not young, they're not 18 anymore, and they have to move on. And I think that's difficult for a lot of people to make the next step into their lives, man. And this was a film that when it was over, I just when I log stuff on Letterboxd. I don't really plug my Letterboxd or anything like that, because if you want to follow me, go for it, man. But I don't really, I do it for myself, really, and for my friends or anything like that, or acquaintances, I should say. But I was looking at kind of middling, sort of, it's all right, this or that. And when it was over, man, it just felt like somebody just punched me in the gut. I just totally had such a visceral, emotional reaction to the film. When I say emotional, man, I don't mean like I'm crying or anything like that. I just mean like, wow, this could have been such a one-note road trip kind of film with these characters who they learn some things along the way, and at the end it all kind of comes together nice. But when it was over, I was just like, yeah, man, it's really leaving me a lot to think about. And I am still thinking about it. And this is just truly just a beautiful film with a lot of great moments, a lot of great funny moments. So it's still a comedy. There's a long sequence in the film involving them jumping out of a makeshift kind of parachute, or not a makeshift skydiving place, and that whole sequence is very amusing as well. And it goes on for quite a bit, which I believe the film is based on a short, and that short, to my knowledge, is that sequence that goes on for about 20 minutes or so. And it's funny because I read and when it comes to IMDb trivia, you gotta really take it with a grain of salt. You gotta really sort of, there aren't any sources with a lot of this, but Steven Spielberg, who put Kevin Reynolds on to make the film, having seen the short, and Spielberg was apparently so disappointed with the end product that he took his name off it, which is so surprising because Spielberg, from a lot of his career, rides on those sentimental moments. And when I say sentimental, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that Spielberg is great at directing these very comforting and very real character situations that it's very surprising that he didn't quite connect with this film. And in a way that a lot of people must not have at the time, because this is a film that is definitely a cult film, man. When people talk about cult films, I think people have this idea of cult as in like action adventure, silly kind of stuff, man, or cult like Rocky Horror or films of the such, and those are all good and stuff. But a film like Fandango is such a cult film, man. This is one that was not appreciated. That watching it now, you go, I can't believe that this. I kind of got the same reaction to this as I did for a film like Big Wednesday, and I think that wasn't done. I don't think that was received too well when it came out either, but or did too well. But Big Wednesday, as well, is a film about these surfers, and it goes through a couple periods in their life, and it's a film that I had such a strong emotional reaction to. And I'll admit, first time I watched that film, I liked it, but I didn't quite connect with it. I don't know why, but something about it, man. This force out there was saying, "Hey, man, give it another shot. Give this film another chance." And when I watched it a second time, man, it just hit everything that it was intended to. And that's a film that I find so beautiful and touching. And I think Fandango as well happened to hit on the first time, but also, ironically enough, actually put up by Warner Archive as well. Fandango, man, was just one of the best films I've seen of recent memory, and a must watch. Mileage may vary, no pun intended, but it's a film that hit with me very hard, and that's why I just want to sing its praises and get the word out there if you haven't already been aware of it. I had an intention to talk about some other films, but I'm going to save those for the next couple episodes. So I hope you're all doing well, and I hope you will come back and join me for another episode next week. So keep on strong, stay focused, and we will discuss next week.